Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 6 about interest groups and political parties. It's Lesson 3 concerning pluralism. In this lesson, you'll learn a lot about elitist theory, democratic theory, pluralist theory, and about upper class bias. On this slide, you see pictures of the rich and powerful, politicians, and those who interact with them. And it's this group of people and their function in society that gives rise to what is called elitist theory. Elitist theory posits that politics is dominated by a small number of elites who then decide what the government should be doing. It's the rich and the powerful who influence government. It's just a small number of them that basically run the country for the rest of us. On this slide, you see masses of people potentially involved in the political process. You see them engaged in voting. You see them engaged in political demonstrations. Democratic theory is based on the idea that these are the people that are in charge and running the country. Democratic theory posits that politics, rather than being dominated by a few elites, is in fact dominated by the desire of the masses, because they are the true sovereigns in society, at least theoretically they are. They are the ones that dominate the government and tell it what to do. That, in effect, the elites even listen to them, because they need to get their support and votes. So it's really the masses that dictate what happens in our country. This slide presents pictures that argue for a different point of view than either elitist theory or democratic theory. This is called pluralist theory. Now, what you see here are interest groups arguing with each other, organizing together. You see a debate about abortion on the steps of the United States Supreme Court, with both pro-abortion and anti-abortion groups fighting it out. You also see a meeting of the National Rifle Association, one of the biggest interest groups in America, talking to its members about how they should be concerned about laws designed to regulate ammunition and guns. What pluralist theory theorizes is that politics is not dominated either by just a few rich, powerful elites at the top, nor is it dominated by the masses of people who get involved in the political process through like demonstrations and voting. Instead, politics is dominated by interest groups. It's these interest groups then, as they fight it out with each other and eventually compromise, that dictates what our society does. This is pluralist theory, that it's groups interacting with each other that rule our society, rather than the mass of the people or a few powerful people at the top. Pluralist theory is sometimes called by the name pluralism. So if you ever see that name pluralism, this is what it's talking about. The idea that there's a bunch of small groups in society, all interacting and fighting and eventually compromising with each other, that decide what our government will or will not do. Some political scientists and political theorists have looked at this idea of pluralism and discovered what they think is a flaw in it. Now remember, the idea of pluralism is you've got all these various groups that are fighting with each other, and that's how our society decides what it will or will not do through its government. Now, it's presenting that idea in opposition to the notion of elitism, and in opposition to the notion of democratic rule also. But let's take elitism here as the relevant thing. So people who believe in pluralism say that society is being run by these groups that are fighting and compromising with each other, rather than just a small number of the rich and powerful telling us what to do. But what some political scientists have observed is that those groups are dominated by the rich and the powerful. As it's put here by this particular political scientist, the pluralist heaven, this idea of all these groups interacting with each other to run society, is a place where the choir, the chorus that's sung there, has an upper class accent. In other words, the people that are involved in these groups, that are running them, who are financing them, who are directing their efforts, come from the class of the rich and powerful. So even if interest groups are in charge, they are dominated by those who have time and money to invest in the causes that the groups are pursuing. And it's the upper class of society, the elites, that have the time and the money to do that. So at least arguably, even if pluralism is really how our society functions, that may just be another way of saying that it's elitism. Because if these groups that are interacting to decide what our country will or will not do are all dominated by the rich and powerful elites, then in the end, isn't it really the elites that are still in charge? Now let's review what we learned in this lesson. In elitist theory, who decides what policies will be pursued by the government? Is it the rule of law that dictates? Is it interest groups that dictate, or the common people that dictate, or the rich and powerful that dictate? In elitist theory, it's the idea that the rich and powerful run our country and run our government. In democratic theory, who decides? Is it the rule of law? Is it interest groups? Is it common people? Or is it the rich and powerful? In democratic theory, it's the common people, the masses, the voters, that decide what our government should be doing. How about in pluralist theory? Who decides then? Is it the rule of law? Is it interest groups? Is it the common people, or is it the rich and powerful? In pluralist theory, it's the interest groups that are deciding what government does. And then finally, who has the most opportunity through this idea of pluralism to actually decide what the country will be doing? Is it the upper class, the middle class, the lower class, or all classes that are involved in the decision-making process through pluralism, or otherwise through the competition of interest groups? There are very good reasons to believe that it's the upper class that has the best opportunity through pluralism, which is a reason to argue why pluralism may in effect just be elitism by another name. Okay, that completes lesson 3 from Unit 6. The next lesson from Unit 6 will be lesson 4 about types of interest groups.